They told us the Galactic Council was an alliance of peace and mutual preservation. They lied. When the invasion fleet arrived, they didn't come to save our besieged colonies. They used us as bait. Now, 40 years later, Earth's fleet is returning the favor, and we aren't leaving survivors. The command deck of the UNS Providence smelled of ozone and stale sweat. Fleet Admiral Harrison Cole stood over the central holotable, his hands gripping the metal edge hard enough to turn his knuckles white. The tactical display bathed his weathered face in a sickly, pulsating blue light. Around him, the bridge was a hive of controlled panic. Damage control sirens wailed in the background, a dull, rhythmic thumping that synced with the pounding in Cole's skull. "Shields are down to 20%, Captain Wyatt said. His voice was gravelly, stripped of its usual calm. He didn't look up from his console. "Reactor 3 is offline. We're losing containment on the port thrusters." Cole didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the holographic representation of the Aegis Prime sector. Humanity had bled for this rock. For 6 months, the United Naval Earth Command had held the line against the encroaching swarm, a hyper-aggressive, mindless insectoid race the Council simply called the Scourge. Earth had poured 2 billion lives, 5 colonial fleets, and countless resources into the meat grinder. We were the shield. We were the front line. The Galactic Council had promised reinforcements. They had promised an armada that would break the siege and push the Scourge back into the deep dark. The armada was here, but they weren't firing. "Wyatt," Cole said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifyingly quiet register. "Where is the Council vanguard? Why aren't they engaging?" Wyatt's fingers danced across the glass of his terminal. The projection on the table shifted, zooming out to show the massive, sleek crescent ships of the Council fleet. They sat perfectly still, holding formation just outside the gravity well of Aegis Prime. They were out of range of the Scourge. They were out of range of the dying human ships. They're holding position, sir," Wyatt stammered, finally looking up. The reflection of the tactical screen danced in his wide eyes. "They've powered up their main batteries, but they aren't targeting the Scourge." Cole's stomach plummeted. Decades of military intuition screamed at him. He slammed a fist onto the comms panel. "Open a channel to the Council flagship. Put Councillor Montgomery on the screen." Static hissed through the bridge, followed by the crisp, overly sanitized visual of the alien dignitary. Montgomery was a Council liaison who had adopted a human name and a tailored diplomatic suit to make his serpentine, grey-scaled features more palatable to Earth's politicians. Right now, his pitch-black eyes gave away absolutely nothing. "Admiral Cole," Montgomery said. His voice was smooth, processed through a real-time translation matrix that gave it an uncanny, aristocratic lilt. "I see your fleet is sustaining heavy casualties." "We're being slaughtered, Montgomery," Cole barked. "Your vanguard is sitting idle at the perimeter. We have the Scourge corralled, just like we planned. Move your ships in and initiate the pincer. If you wait any longer, our defensive line is going to break." Montgomery didn't blink. He reached off screen, adjusting something out of frame. "There has been a change in the tactical doctrine, Admiral. The Council has evaluated the Scourge's numbers. They are vastly greater than our initial projections." "I don't care about projections. We have them pinned." "You have them localized," Montgomery corrected. "But engaging them in a conventional firefight would cost the Council fleet an estimated 34% of our vessels. That is an unacceptable expenditure of Council resources." The bridge of the Providence went dead silent. Even the frantic damage control officers stopped to listen. "What are you saying?" Cole asked. "We cannot risk our fleet, Admiral. However, your forces have performed admirably. You have successfully gathered the majority of the Scourge hive into a single gravity well." Montgomery folded his hands. We are going to deploy a subspace fracture weapon into the core of Aegis Prime. It will ignite the atmosphere, collapse the planet's mantle, and pull the surrounding local space into a temporary singularity. The Scourge will be annihilated. Wyatt dropped his datapad. It clattered against the metal deck. Cole stared at the screen. The subspace fracture weapon. A planet killer. A fleet killer. My ships are in that local space. There are 40 million human colonists still on the surface of Aegis Prime. If you fire that weapon, you kill us all. It is a heavy toll, Montgomery said. His voice didn't waver. There was no pity, no remorse, just cold, bureaucratic mathematics. But the survival of the Council supersedes the survival of a single fringe species. You are a soldier, Admiral. You understand the necessity of sacrifice. Your species will be remembered as martyrs for the greater good. Montgomery, wait. The screen went black. The transmission was cut. "Sir!" Wyatt yelled, his voice cracking. "Council ships are locking on. Not to the Scourge. They're locking on to us. They're establishing a containment grid." They weren't just leaving humanity to die in the crossfire. They were actively trapping them inside the blast zone to make sure the Scourge couldn't escape. Humanity was the bait. And the Council was closing the trap. "All ships," Cole ordered, his voice echoing through the general channel. The panic was gone. Only a cold, terrifying clarity remained. "Break formation. Abandon the colonists. Full power to the slipspace drives. Jump anywhere. Just get out of the grid." It was too late. On the holotable, a blinding white light erupted from the center of Aegis Prime. It was beautiful for a fraction of a second, a star being born in the atmosphere. Then, the shockwave hit. Cole watched as the tactical icons of his fleet began to blink out. Not one by one. By the dozens. The UNS Dauntless. Gone. The UNS Churchill. Gone. The UNS Roosevelt. Gone. The shockwave slammed into the Providence. The massive dreadnought groaned, the hull buckling under gravitational forces it was never designed to withstand. Bulkheads screamed. Sparks rained down from the ceiling as consoles exploded, taking out the officers manning them. Cole was thrown to the deck, tasting copper as his head cracked against the grating. The ship spun wildly out of control, caught on the very edge of the collapsing singularity. The slipspace drive screamed, struggling to grip the tearing fabric of reality. "Jump!" Cole roared, spitting blood. "Jump now!" The bridge twisted. The stars outside the viewport elongated into sickening streaks of purple and black. With a violent, bone-rattling shudder, the Providence tore itself out of real space, dragging 3 other crippled human destroyers in its wake. They left behind 400 human warships. They left behind 40 million colonists. They left behind the idea that humanity could ever trust another living soul in the galaxy. When the Providence finally dropped out of slipspace, adrift and leaking atmosphere on the dark edge of the Sol system, Cole dragged himself up to the captain's chair. Wyatt was slumped over his console, a piece of shrapnel buried in his shoulder, breathing heavily. "Casualties?" Cole asked. Wyatt keyed his remaining functional screen. Tears cut tracks through the soot on his face. 98% of the expeditionary force is gone. The colony is gone. Cole looked out the cracked viewport into the endless, indifferent black of space. The Council thought they had sterilized the threat. They thought they had tied off a loose end. They didn't understand humans. You don't burn down a man's house, kill his family, and leave him alive. "Initiate total communications blackout," Cole commanded. Wyatt frowned, wincing. "Sir, we need to call Earth for a rescue." "No, we go dark. Earth goes dark. The colonies go dark. As far as the Council is concerned, humanity died today, at Aegis Prime." Cole wiped the blood from his chin. We let them think they won, and we get to work. 40 years. To the Galactic Council, 40 years was a mere blink, a minor administrative cycle. They had written humanity off as an unfortunate casualty of a necessary war. The scourge had been eradicated, the borders were secure, and the loss of a primitive, aggressive ape species from the Sol system was mourned only in hollow diplomatic speeches that stopped entirely after the first decade. But for humanity, 40 years was an eternity. It was a crucible. Earth did not cry out in outrage. They did not appeal to the galactic courts. They understood the math. The Council possessed 10,000 warships. Humanity, after the massacre at Aegis Prime, possessed 34. Retaliation at that moment would have meant extinction. So, humanity vanished. They dismantled their long-range communication buoys. They collapsed their outer system jump gates. They wrapped the Sol system in a blanket of silent, impenetrable stealth arrays, and they began to dig. Admiral Harrison Cole stood on the observation deck of the deep space staging platform, Tartarus, anchored in the churning rings of Saturn. He was an old man now. The flesh of his left arm and the lower half of his jaw had been replaced with brushed steel and synthetic tissue, souvenirs from the slow, agonizing decay of radiation sickness he'd suffered after Aegis. He required a cane to walk, but his posture was as rigid as titanium. He looked down through the reinforced glass at the shipyard. It was no longer a shipyard. It was a mechanized organ of pure, unadulterated vengeance. The entirety of Saturn's rings had been strip-mined, converted into orbital foundries that burned 24 hours a day. The skies of Earth were choked with industrial smog. The oceans had been drained of resources. Art, entertainment, leisure, these concepts had been ruthlessly excised from human culture. Every man, woman, and child born in the last 4 decades had been raised with one singular, undeniable purpose: war. "The final heavy cruisers have cleared the dry docks, Admiral," Commander Bradley said, stepping up beside Cole. Bradley was 30 years old. He had never seen a blue sky. He had never tasted real meat. He was a product of the post-Aegis generation, cold, efficient, and harboring a deeply ingrained, inherited hatred for a galaxy he had never even seen. Cole tapped his cane against the deck. Yield: 500 extinction-class dreadnoughts, 2,000 heavy cruisers, 10,000 automated drone carriers, Bradley recited, handing Cole a data slate. All equipped with the new gravity shear cannons. The slipspace drives have been successfully calibrated for massive, fleet-wide jumps. We've bypassed the Council's detection threshold. They won't see us until we are already inside their atmosphere. Cole looked at the ships floating in the void below. They were ugly. There were no sleek lines, no aerodynamic curves designed to look intimidating or majestic. They were brutalist slabs of black armor, plating, built around massive, spinal-mounted weapons. They weren't ships, they were flying guns. "What about the payload?" Cole asked. Bradley's jaw tightened. "The Terracrackers are loaded on the Vanguard ships. Yield is testing at 100%. We crack the crust, ignite the core, and watch it burn." "Good." Cole turned away from the window. "Are the men ready?" "They've been ready since they were born, sir." Cole walked slowly toward the command center. For 40 years he had kept himself alive through pure spite. The medical officers had told him to retire. They told him his heart would give out. But he had refused. He needed to be here. He needed to see it through. He had promised the ghosts of Aegis Prime that he would balance the ledger. He entered the central command room. The hum of the tactical displays was a familiar comfort. Hundreds of officers sat at their stations, operating in complete, disciplined silence. There was no chatter, "Fleet-wide broadcast," Cole said. A red light blinked on the central holotable. Millions of personnel across the Armada, from the deepest engine rooms to the highest bridge decks, stopped and listened. Cole leaned over the microphone. 40 years ago, the Galactic Council decided that our lives were an acceptable currency to purchase their safety. They locked our brothers, our sisters, our children in a cage with a monster, and they set the cage on fire. They thought they broke us. They thought we would bleed out in the dark. He paused, the servos in his jaw whirring softly. But you do not burn iron to destroy it. You burn it to forge it into steel. The Council values mathematics. They value the cold calculation of lives. Today, we go to their capital. We go to Apex, and we are going to show them our math. Cole looked up at Bradley. He gave a single sharp nod. Initiate jump sequence. The command room erupted into a flurry of keystrokes. Spinning up slipspace drives, Pilot Mitchell called out from the navigation console. Fleet-wide synchronization at 99%, targeting the Apex system. Prime meridian coordinates locked. Spool the gravity shear cannons, Cole ordered. I don't want a single ship powering weapons after we drop. I want us dropping with our fingers on the trigger. Weapons spooled, sir. Power grid is holding. The space outside the observation windows began to warp. The stars stretched, bleeding into streaks of violent violet light. The sheer mass of the fleet engaging their drives simultaneously caused the localized gravity around Saturn to shudder. Jump in 3, Mitchell counted down. His hands were steady. 2, 1. Mark. Space tore open. Not a single ship, nor a small detachment. An entire species worth of hatred, wrapped in 12,000 layers of depleted uranium and dark matter, hurled itself into the void. The Sol system went quiet once again. But humanity was no longer hiding. They were knocking on the Council's door. Apex was a world of pristine white oceans and floating, crystalline spire cities. It was a monument to the Galactic Council's perceived invulnerability, a planet bathed in perpetual, manufactured twilight. The planetary defense grid was an afterthought. It was a ceremonial net of gilded orbital stations meant to deter scavengers and pirates, not armadas. Inside the Grand Assembly, Councillor Montgomery sat in his observation suite, sipping a warm narcotic broth. His grey-scaled skin was paler now, thinned by age and decades of comfortable, unchallenged political maneuvering. He was reviewing a minor trade dispute from the Outer Rim when the proximity alarms began to scream. It wasn't a standard alert. It was the deep, guttural klaxon of a Class 1 spatial anomaly, a sound that hadn't echoed through the assembly halls in centuries. "Report!" Montgomery snapped, tapping his comms link. The translation matrix embedded in his throat hummed, smoothing his natural clicks into flawless council standard. The visual feed from Orbital Command flickered onto his primary screen. The young technician on the other end was hyperventilating, his mandibles clicking frantically against his headset. "Sir, a localized slipspace rupture is forming in the upper exosphere. It's massive. It's tearing the local gravity field apart. The ceremonial defense platforms are losing orbital tethering." Montgomery stood, knocking his crystal cup to the polished marble floor. The broth hissed against the stone. "A natural phenomenon? A rogue singularity?" "No, sir. It's structured. The energy signatures are entirely synthetic. It's a fleet drop." Montgomery frowned, his dark eyes narrowing. "Whose fleet?" Before the technician could answer, the sky above Apex shattered. The pristine, engineered blue atmosphere turned bruised and black as real space tore open violently. They did not drop in a defensive formation. They did not arrange themselves in the elegant, sweeping arcs favored by council tacticians. They dropped like a falling knife. 12,000 blocks of black, brutalist human iron slammed into the orbital space of Apex. They were so massive, and there were so many, that their combined gravitational pull instantly dragged the ceremonial defense platforms out of orbit. The golden stations tumbled helplessly, colliding with one another in silent, blooming explosions of sparks and vented atmosphere. On the bridge of the Providence, Admiral Harrison Cole watched the jewel of the Council fill his viewport. He felt no awe at the beauty of the spire cities. He felt no hesitation. His synthetic jaw hummed with a low, mechanical vibration. "Target locks confirmed across the Vanguard," Commander Bradley reported, his voice devoid of any adrenaline. It was the voice of a man clocking into a factory shift. "All gravity-shear cannons are spooled." "Open fire," Cole ordered. Humanity didn't issue an ultimatum. They didn't demand surrender. They simply pulled the trigger. The gravity-shear cannons fired in perfect unison. A wave of distorted spatial energy, invisible but catastrophic, slammed into the Council's defense fleet anchored in high orbit. The sleek, beautiful crescent ships were not pierced by lasers or battered by kinetic slugs. They were crushed. The gravity shears caught the vessels and folded local space inward. Titanium alloy hulls crumpled like wet paper. Fusion reactors breached under the immense gravitational pressure, detonating within the twisted wreckage. In less than 40 seconds, the Council's elite defense force was reduced to a drifting ring of pulverized, irradiated debris. The sky over Apex filled with a terrifying, silent fire. Montgomery watched from his suite, his dark eyes wide with a terror he had never known. The translation matrix choked on his panicked gasps. He recognized the brutalist hull configurations on the orbital feeds. They were primitive, ugly, and unmistakably born from the Sol system. "Earth," he whispered, stepping back from the glass. "It isn't possible. They were neutralized." He lunged for the diplomatic console, overriding the military channels to broadcast on an open, unencrypted frequency. His hands shook as he bypassed the encryption protocols. "Unidentified human vessels. Cease fire immediately. You are firing on the capital of the Galactic Council. Stand down and state your terms. We are willing to negotiate." Aboard the Providence, Bradley looked up from his tactical display, a flicker of disgust crossing his stoic features. "Sir, we are receiving a wide-band transmission from the planetary surface. Origin point is the Grand Assembly. It's an unencrypted diplomatic channel." Cole leaned heavily on his cane, watching the burning wreckage of a Council dreadnought drift past the viewport. The hull was bleeding frozen atmosphere into the void. "Block the visual feed. Put the audio on the bridge speakers." Montgomery's voice, perfectly modulated by the translation matrix, echoed across the silent human bridge. It begged for a ceasefire. It promised immediate territorial concessions, vast reparations, and an unconditional treaty of peace. Cole listened to the sheer desperation in the alien's voice. It sounded exactly like Captain Wyatt had, 40 years ago, begging for the lives of the colonists on Aegis Prime. "Shall I patch you through to him, Admiral?" Bradley asked, his hand hovering over the communications relay. Cole shook his head slowly. "No. Let him talk to the void. Reroute targeting parameters to the planetary defense cannons on the surface. Take them out before they can calibrate their tracking sensors to our trajectory." The black slabs of the human fleet descended lower, breaking the upper atmosphere. The sheer friction of their collective re-entry turned the sky of Apex into a burning canopy of red heat. Below, panic consumed the pristine spire cities. Billions of Council citizens poured into the immaculate streets, watching the apocalypse descend upon them. The automated defense cannons finally woke up, their targeting lasers cutting through the smoke. Streaks of azure plasma lanced upward, striking the bellies of the human dreadnoughts. The energy splashed completely harmlessly against the dark matter armor plating. Humanity had spent 40 years designing these ships to withstand the intense thermal heat of a dying star. A few planetary turrets were nothing. The Providence shuddered slightly, a mere vibration in the deck plates, as a heavy plasma bolt grazed its port bow. "Return fire," Cole ordered. The Providence unleashed a kinetic bombardment. Massive tungsten rods, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, dropped from the ventral launch tubes. They struck the planetary defense batteries with the kinetic force of small nuclear warheads. Plumes of dirt, pulverized crystal, and shattered permacrete erupted across the pristine continents. The shockwaves leveled entire city blocks, shattering the glass of the floating spires and sending them crashing into the oceans below. The silence of the human fleet was their most terrifying weapon. They communicated only in absolute destruction. There were no demands, no boasts, no grand speeches of vengeance broadcast to the populace. There was just the methodical, industrial-scale dismantling of the Council's infrastructure. Montgomery watched his terminal feeds go dark one by one. The planetary shield generator was destroyed. The orbital dockyards were gone. The defense grid was a memory. The human fleet now hung motionless in the sky, a terrifying ceiling of black iron blocking out the sun. They had total air superiority. They had won. Montgomery slumped into his chair, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the invasion craft to deploy. He waited for the dropships, the ground troops, the inevitable occupation. They never came. Commander Bradley's hands danced across his terminal, his eyes scanning the endless streams of green data. "All atmospheric defenses are neutralized, Admiral. The fleet is holding formation at 30,000 feet. Target locks are confirmed on all major population centers, industrial sectors, and governmental hubs." Cole stepped closer to the viewport. The beautiful world below was now scarred with massive kinetic craters and billowing columns of black smoke. "Status of the terror crackers?" he asked, his voice a low mechanical rasp that barely carried over the hum of the ship's reactor. "Payloads are primed, sir," Bradley replied instantly. "Vanguard ships are aligned over the primary tectonic fault lines. We are holding at 100% yield. We are awaiting your final authorization." Cole stared down at the blue oceans of Apex. They looked painfully similar to the oceans of Earth. A small, deeply buried part of Cole's humanity, the part that hadn't burned away in the fires of Aegis Prime, twitched. Below him were billions of lives. Bureaucrats, yes. Architects of genocide, undoubtedly. But also civilians. Innocents who had absolutely no say in what the Council did 40 years ago. The sheer, crushing weight of what he was about to do pressed down on his chest, tightening his lungs. If he gave the order, humanity would cross a threshold they could never return from. They would irrevocably become the monsters they had spent 4 decades preparing to fight. He gripped the heavy handle of his cane. The metal groaned audibly under the pressure. "Admiral," Bradley said quietly, breaking the silence. "We have an incoming hail. It's bypassing the standard communication filters and forcing a direct link. Directing frequency to your command, Chair." Cole frowned. "Source?" "The assembly surface suite. It's Councillor Montgomery, sir." Cole's eyes narrowed. The ghost from the past. The architect of the cage. "Put him on screen." The tactical holotable flickered to life, and Montgomery's face appeared in high definition. The alien looked ancient, completely broken. The aristocratic superiority that had defined him was entirely stripped away, leaving only a terrified, desperate creature gasping for air. "Admiral Cole," Montgomery breathed, his dark eyes widening as he recognized the half-metal face of the human commander. "You survived." "I endured," Cole corrected, his voice as cold and empty as the void outside. "And now, I am here." "Please," Montgomery begged, holding up his scaled, trembling hands toward the capture lens. "You have proved your point. You have decimated our fleet. You have brought the entire council to its knees. We surrender. We will give you anything you want. Resources, territory, a permanent, undisputed seat on the High Council. We can rebuild what was lost. We can make amends." Cole stared at the alien on the screen. The raging, fiery anger he expected to feel wasn't there. There was only a cold, hollow emptiness in his chest. "You can't rebuild Aegis Prime, Montgomery. You can't unburn 40 million people. You didn't leave us a seat at the table. You locked the doors and you set the room on fire. It was a tactical necessity," Montgomery pleaded, his voice cracking, tears of panic finally brimming in his black eyes. "The scourge would have consumed the entire galaxy. We had to sacrifice the few to save the many. It was simple mathematics, Admiral. You are a soldier. You understand the cold logic of war." Cole leaned forward, his synthetic jaw clicking into place with a sharp, metallic snap. "I do understand your mathematics, Counselor. That is exactly why we are here. To show you ours." Cole reached down to the command console. "You calculated that our survival was an unacceptable expenditure of resources. We calculated that your existence is an unacceptable threat to our species. The math balances." "Admiral, wait! There are billions of innocents down here," Montgomery screamed, entirely abandoning his dignity. "You cannot do this. It is a war crime. It is absolute genocide." Cole's expression did not change. His eyes were dead. "It is a heavy toll," Cole said, mirroring Montgomery's exact words from 40 years ago flawlessly. "But the survival of humanity supersedes the survival of the Council. Your species will be remembered as a necessary casualty for our greater good." Cole severed the connection. The holographic screen went pitch black. He looked up at Bradley. The young commander's eyes were locked on him, unblinking, waiting for the word. There was no hesitation in the younger generation. There was only duty. "Deploy the terror crackers," Cole ordered. "Burn it all." From the armored bellies of the 500 Extinction-class dreadnoughts, massive, spear-like projectiles dropped in perfect unison. They did not have thrusters. They fell using pure kinetic gravity, accelerating to devastating, supersonic speeds as they ripped through the lower atmosphere. They struck the oceans and the continents simultaneously. They didn't explode on impact. They burrowed. They punched straight through the planetary crust, drilling miles deep into the planet's volatile mantle. For 10 agonizing, breathless seconds, nothing happened. The broken spire cities of Apex stood silent under the shadow of the human fleet. Then, the crust fractured. A spiderweb of glowing, blinding orange magma erupted across the continents, violently tearing the landmasses apart. The terror crackers detonated in a synchronized chain reaction deep inside the planetary core. Apex did not just burn, it shattered. The oceans instantly flash-boiled into steam, creating super hurricanes of scalding vapor that scoured the surface completely clean of organic life. The crystalline spire cities collapsed into the widening tectonic rifts, swallowed whole by roaring rivers of molten rock. The atmosphere ignited, turning the entire planet into a swirling, chaotic ball of fire and ash. The human fleet held their position, their dark matter armor easily shielding them from the intense thermal backwash. They floated in perfect silence, watching as the undisputed jewel of the Galactic Council was violently erased from the cosmos. It was total, uncompromising annihilation. There were no escape pods launched. There were no survivors. Cole watched the planet die. The sickly blue light of the bridge was completely replaced by the harsh, violent orange glow of the burning world below. He stood in absolute silence for a long time, listening to the hum of his ship. The debt was paid. The ledger was finally balanced. But as he looked down at the ash of Apex, he felt no triumph. He felt no vindication or joy. The ghosts of ages prime were finally avenged. But they were still dead. Humanity was safe, but they had sacrificed their soul to ensure it. They were entirely alone in a dark, cold galaxy, holding a bloody, smoking sword. Cole turned away from the viewport, his cane tapping heavily against the deck. "Set a course for Earth," Cole whispered, his voice tired and completely drained. "We're going home. That concludes our journey into the dark heart of human vengeance." When pushed to the brink of extinction, humanity didn't just survive. We became the very fire the galaxy feared. If this story of betrayal and brutal retribution kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share it with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe for more epic HFY tales. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next Dark Void.